Hey guys, Cilla here from Normal Suburban Moms. This video is about how Shannon and I met and ultimately got together. And as it turns out, 20 years of history makes a very long video, so we split it up into two. So right here is part one of that story. I hope you enjoy it and feel free to subscribe and leave comments down below. Hey guys, I'm Cilla.
I'm Shannon.
And we're Normal Suburban Moms. I can't get through that without laughing.
I know.
It's cheese.
We'll have to do something else.
It's cheesy. It's okay. We're cheese balls.
Yeah, true.
So, today's episode, we're going to discuss our love story. So, lots of cheese in this episode.
Super cheese.
Before we get into the story,
Okay.
I feel the need to put a disclaimer on it.
A disclaimer on our love story?
The beginning of it.
Oh, geez. You get so caught up in... Okay, go ahead.
I was not a good person as a teenager. I went through a lot my freshman and especially my sophomore year. So by the time my junior year rolled around, which is when we met, I was a pretty closed off person, and I was a pretty materialistic person, and I was a pretty bratty person.
Only a little.
I wasn't a very good person.
She overblows this so much.
Because I feel so guilty about our first meeting, and I'll never stop feeling bad about that. I just feel the need to express that that's not who I am anymore. And that I know our meeting was not my finest moment, but it led me to my finest moment.
Okay.
So that being said, let's get into it. We met when I was a junior in high school.
Now it's a senior.
Back in the year
2000.
Wow, that makes us sound old. I guess we are old. Yeah.
A little bit old.
Anyway.
Just more experienced.
To be specific, August 16th, 2000. It was the second day of school.
Second day. The first day at lunch, I kind of hid in the hallway. I was the new kid my senior year.
Yeah, she had to switch schools her senior year.
What?
I had been at the same school for all 4 years. I pretty much I was in the same school district with the same kids from kindergarten through senior year, with the exception of 6 months. So I was pretty well established.
She's been living the suburban dream for most of her life.
Yeah. All of my life, really.
And I moved around a lot as a kid. So, yeah, I went to 3 different high schools, and hers was the last one I landed at.
So the second day of school, like I said, I went through some stuff my sophomore year that kind of left me closed off. I kind of distanced myself from my friends. I didn't really want anybody around. So much had happened my sophomore year that I really just wanted to be left the heck alone. And there was this bench at the end of this corridor that typically it's where my friend group used to sit, but they had since moved on, and I was left behind, and it was my space to be alone. Nobody else sat there, and I liked it that way. It was my sanctuary, for lack of a better term. So the second day of school, I'm walking down the corridor to get to my bench, and I see this girl sitting there that I don't know, and I'd never seen before, which was a little odd to me considering the fact that I pretty much knew everybody in school, at least had seen them around, having been there for 2 years already. And so I walk up, and my first words to her were, "Who are you and why are you sitting on my bench?" And she told me, "I'm sorry, I'm new here." And I said, "Oh, I guess you can stay." I'm not proud of that. Yes, I know that's terrible.
But you didn't run me off?
Which shocks me. She should have said F you and gotten up and walked away, and that should have been the end of it. And thank the gods she didn't do that, because
thank the gods I'm non-confrontational.
But that's how we met.
It is how we met. I think it's a hilarious story because, we have been best friends for so long, since that day, shockingly. And it's just so funny to me that those were her first words to me. And, that's how this amazing thing all started.
We were best friends by the end of that lunch. We started, I had no intention of talking to her. After I told her she could stay, I sat down on the other side of the bench and figured, whatever, I'll just sit here and she can sit there and we'll just sit together and not talk.
Nay.
But she started talking to me. And not wanting to be any ruder than I already had been, I started talking back. And then she started talking about music, but not just any music. Classic rock.
Oh my gosh. I was deep into my hippie phase in my senior year of high school. It lasted longer than just that year, though. It went on for a while.
She's still a bit of a recovering hippie.
I'm not recovering. I'm just a little bit of a hippie.
We started talking about classic rock, and my dad, my adoptive dad, was, for most of my formative years, a radio DJ and had worked at many rock stations through his career, so I knew classic rock. And growing up in the 80s, I became a very big fan of 80s rock. To this day, Bon Jovi remains my favorite band. And so we started talking about bands that, such classic rock, 80s rock, whatnot. And nobody else that I went to school with, nobody else my age, knew anything about this music. So it was shocking and wonderful to meet someone my age that knew about it. And so that immediately, my walls started to come down. We started talking, and we really were best friends by the end of lunch. We did everything together that year.
Everything.
She was at my house every weekend.
I had a really shitty home life, so yeah, as much time as I could spend away from there, it was great.
And at the time, I was living with my sperm donor, biological father.
She didn't have the greatest home life either, so we were kind of each other's escape.
Yeah, because I typically refer to him as my sperm donor. However, since I did live with him at this point, I guess we can call him biological father. Anyway, it wasn't a good environment. And so she would come over on the weekends, and biological father would be on his best behavior because we had a visitor. So it saved me, and it got her out of her house. So yeah, it was definitely a we saved each other situation.
For sure. Like, literally, probably saved each other.
And in fact, we were so close that biological father thought we were in a relationship when we were in high school. Biological father is where I get my Latina from. And he was raised in that culture, has not done anything to break free from that culture, and perpetuates that culture, all the negative aspects of it, and especially the macho male thing and homophobic and whatnot. So he called my mom one day in what my mom said was near tears and asked to meet her because they needed to talk. So they went to a local Mexican restaurant, and he told her that he thought that we were in a relationship, and my mom's reaction was, so what? So what if they are? And his response was to basically hyperventilate.
And we weren't at that time at all. We were best friends. That was it.
No, in retrospect, I think that we may have had feelings for each other that we didn't realize, but at the time, I was very much in love with a boy that had moved to Houston and was my first love. And I was way too blinded by my love for him to see anything else outside of that.
And I was in love with a boy that I had left behind in Georgia, who was also my first love. So, yeah, we basically would talk about our respective boys that we were hung up on.
And, you know, hindsight being 2020 and all, we have looked back recently and realized there probably was something there if we wouldn't have been so hung up on those boys.
Probably, but you know.
But there, in actuality, there wasn't anything going on. And so, as I've said in a previous video, I understand a bit of Love Victor and that culture and what Victor was going through, being scared to come out to his parents, because at the point in which my biological father thought I was a lesbian, I hadn't even admitted to myself I was bisexual yet. I knew it, but I hadn't admitted it to myself. And so at the point that he just thought I was a lesbian, that was his reaction. And that was a pretty common cultural reaction. Ironically, my half-sisters both turned out to be LGBT in their own right too, so he ended up with 3 biological children that are all LGBT, so I think that's karma, but that's another story. Point is, I understand that because that's what I went through. So, oh my God, if I had been ready to come out as bisexual at that point in time, I can't imagine what the reaction would have been.
Yeah.
That was an uncomfortable situation that I feel like definitely hindered me coming out. Mm-hmm. But regardless, I'm digressing. So we went through your senior year of high school together, mm-hmm. and we were together pretty much every waking moment we could be. Mm-hmm. We did have a couple of other friends that came and went throughout the year, but the constant was each other.
Yeah.
And then at the end of your senior year, you moved back to Georgia.
Yeah, so by the end of my senior year, we had been in Texas for 3 years. Okay, quick little aside for context. I'm originally from Georgia. I grew up in South Georgia, and my mom met and married a Hispanic man after my parents divorced, who was from the Valley, from South Texas, San Benito, and which is really close to where she lived, in Harlingen. So my mom is a nurse, and at the time in South Georgia, they were graduating a lot of new nurses. There weren't a lot of jobs for nurses because the market was just flooded with all these new nurses, and my mom had a lot of experience, so most places felt like they could hire the new nurses for cheaper, and it was just really difficult for her to find a job and get paid what she was worth, basically. And so I guess her and my stepdad talked. I don't know how it came together. So they decided, well, you know, his family lives in the Valley. We can stay with them while, you know, my mom works and we get on our feet again and whatnot. So that's what we did. We packed everything up. We moved from South Georgia to the Valley, which, by the way, is a huge culture shock for me. It was...
I can't even imagine.
There was definitely a learning curve of the culture and a lot of things. But it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. At the end of my senior year, we had been in South Texas for 3 years. My mom absolutely hated it. I think her, crappy marriage probably had a lot to do with that, but that's another thing. Anyway, she hated it. She hated the heat. She hated just everything about it. She could not wait to get out of Texas. I graduated high school. The next day we spent the day at the beach, and the next day, everything was packed up and we left for Georgia. It was that fast.
And one of the worst days, I still remember the day I went to her house to say goodbye, and it was so hard. But also ultimately what led me to move away from my biological father, move back in with my mom and adoptive dad for my senior year, because I couldn't stand the idea of going through my last year of high school without her to be a buffer for me. So that good came out of that. But, oh man, I missed you terribly.
Yeah. I missed you too. It sucked.
And I did go to Georgia to visit some.
And I came back to Texas to visit a couple times.
Yeah, she came back the next year for my high school graduation. And we had a lot of fun. That's
another video.
That was a really fun trip. And I went to Georgia quite a few times. During this time that we were living separately, I was still very hung up on my first love. And she went through different relationships. She had a relationship with a guy that she was engaged to that actually ultimately ended up being what we refer to as sperm donor of our child.
Yeah, so I was really young when I met him. I was 19. We were together for 3 years. I broke up with him because it just, I don't know, it wasn't right. And almost immediately got together with the guy I was hung up on my senior year, my first love, that guy. Yeah, started having a long distance relationship with him because he lived about 4 hours away from me at the southern end of the state, and by that time I was living in Athens, which is close to North Georgia. It's in North Georgia. So there was that. But also a week and a half after I broke up with the first guy that I was with for 3 years, I found out that I was pregnant, which I felt at the time was a really cruel trick of fate, because when I broke up with him, I told him that I wasn't ready for a commitment.
And the gods were like, here you go.
And yeah, the gods were like, here's your commitment. But, I mean, I wouldn't trade her for anything. I love her.
No, and I still remember the day she called me telling me she was pregnant. Yeah, there were tears, there was fear, there was a lot.
I'm not going to name names, but she was like, don't tell the sperm donor, don't tell him. And I'm like, I told him first because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And
she was wrong.
It turns out it really wasn't. That's probably another video. A lot of videos coming out of this video.
I had, as I previously stated, a very rough relationship with my sperm donor, and I recognized a lot of the same stuff in her ex. And I was like, you don't want him in your child's life. And as it turns out, I was unfortunately right. But I actually went to Georgia not long after that because I was at her first sonogram, which in retrospect, now that she's my daughter too, makes me really, really happy that I got to be there for that.
And the sperm donor was not there.
No, he was not. I was the one that went with her.
Yeah. And
I would have been with her every step of the way if I hadn't lived in Texas. Anyway, our daughter was born. At the time, I had more of an aunt role in her life, but I mean, I may as well have been the second parent.
Yeah.
I'm the one that sent her seasonal clothes and toys and stuff. The sperm donor didn't do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was kind of the parent before I was the parent. In the meantime, I was back in Texas, still hung up on my first love. That's a whole nother drama, the off and on and back and forth, and I love him, we're going to be together. He just hasn't realized how much he loves me. And I think he took advantage of my feelings, which
probably.
I don't blame him for, because I totally allowed him to do. Because
you did.
I figured if I stick this out, he'll eventually realize my devotion to him and be with me. I was dumb. And to be clear, this ex-love of mine is currently next to her, my very best friend.
Yeah, he's a really good friend of both of us.
We ultimately did become friends, which is why I will not name his name. He knows who he is. If he ever watches this, I will not name his name or give too many details about him personally. because he is one of my very best friends, and as friends we are awesome. As anything more than friends, we're kind of a disaster. So
Just
yeah,
not meant to be.
some people just aren't meant to be together, and this was that. So I spent most of my 20s going back and forth with that. She spent most of her 20s going from relationship to relationship. She's the slutty friend.
Oh God. You know, and I own that. I mean, I did like go through strings of relationships, and you know, did stupid things and made dumb mistakes and did what most people in their 20s do.
And there was one point that your first love, that you were, I don't know that y'all were officially engaged, but y'all were practically engaged.
I mean, we were talking about it. We bought a house together. It was in his name.
And he never let her forget it.
We were together for 3 years, and toward the end of that, I was in the worst depression I had ever been in.
He was very mentally and psychologically abusive to her.
Yes, and you know, I'm not going to name his name either, because it's just not right to do that. But I mean, he was someone that I had known since I was 13 years old. I met him in middle school in South Georgia, and you know, he could have been the one, but I grew up with a mentally abusive alcoholic stepfather, and when I was with this person, this guy, he had many of the same problems as my stepfather, and eventually I just couldn't live like that anymore, and I refused to live like that ever again.
Well, you did leave him and come to Texas.
I did. So yeah, so it was the very beginning of January 2008. I knew he was going to be away at work for a while, and while he was away, I packed all of my things up in my car, and packed up my baby, who was almost 2 at the time, and drove out to Texas to her apartment. And I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, but I had to get away from there.
And I pretty much begged her to come to me, to stay with me. I told her I would find a way to take care of her and our daughter, or at the time her daughter, and that everything would be okay. And so she came, and I was so happy. And I think if she would have stayed at that point, we'd have ended up together much sooner than we did.
Yeah.
But she only stayed for couple of days, and then she went back to him, and that was the second time I had to say goodbye to her, and it was much harder. And by this point, I think I definitely was feeling things, but hadn't yet admitted it to myself, because it hurt so bad when she left that time. Part of it was just being her best friend and being worried about what she was going back to and what she was taking her daughter back into. And I think part of it was I wanted her to stay here and, you know, be roommates or best friends or have some sort of life together, whatever that meant. But he called her, and I think he promised he would change, and all of the typical
stuff. He, you know, I wasn't quite broken down enough at that point, but because I had only lived with him for about a month at that time. Anyway, it's hard to think about this time in my life because it was really a low point. But you know, he said all the right things, and I had known him for so long, and I was in love with him, and
she wanted to believe him.
I wanted to make it work. I did. I wanted to believe him, and I went back. Not my finest moment. Definitely a mistake.
And definitely hurt our friendship for a little while, because I was so hurt. And But ultimately, we patched things up. You did finally leave him, although you went back to Athens, I believe.
Not at that time. I went to stay with my aunt. I bounced around from house to house a lot. I was a young mom. I was a single mom. It was hard to find work. I was completely unskilled. I only had a high school diploma. So that was a really rough few years for me. I refused to go back to my mom's house because she was back with my stepdad at the time, and I couldn't fathom leaving one abusive alcoholic for another. So I stayed with my aunt for, I think, about 6 months. Um, I don't even know the time frame of everywhere I bounced for the next few years.
But the important thing is you did get out of it.
I did get out of it.
And then there were other relationships.
Yes.
Which, of course, being her best friend, I was around for all of it.
We don't have to rehash everyone.
No, we're not going to go into all of them. But I was there through our 20s. By the end of my 20s, I finally, around the age of 28, I think, finally decided that my first love was just not a thing that was going to happen. So that only took me from the age of 14 to the age of 28. Not my finest moment. And then there was another guy that I thought there could be something with, and it turned out, for a whole multitude of reasons, that he just wasn't who I thought he was. And then I had some crushes here and there, but nothing major. There was really only those two guys that anything came of. Okay, so that's part 1 of mine and Shannon's love story. Part 2 will be the next video on this channel. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye!